So following on from the recording of my 48 track recording Touch the Sky, I thought I'd take you through a bit about how I did that and how I went through the processes in order to put everything together. Well, first of all, I wrote the chord sequence on a piece of paper with a pen. How quaint. So basically this is what I followed in order to, so I sat at the piano and wrote out that chord sequence. And then I used that in order to play the other parts like the acoustic guitar and the bass. And that's what you can see here on the iPad. At the top I've got Levi, the drummer that I chose to use. And you can see that it's lots and lots of sections. I've just changed very slightly the sort of the joystick on drummer. If I just go and have a look at this, you can see that at the beginning, for example, it was quite gentle. You can see it's quite soft, no fills, and then as it progresses through, it just gets a bit louder and louder and louder. With the choruses, and well, that's back to the verse. With the choruses having ride cymbal, so you can make your choices. So there's the drummer there. Let's go back to the beginning. And then I had a SoCal kit. Now the point of this was to give myself a count in. Now I tried to give the impression of sort of free time at the beginning by still using the click, but deciding on a number of eighth notes that I was going to hold each chord for. So I had 4, 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, and then 2 bars of the final chord. And you can hear that if I play it back with this. And I use the sort of toms at the end, gung, gung, as like a count-in, just in case I missed those 2 bars for everything else that I recorded. So, the first thing I did was to put the bass down, which is the next track down. I used the classic stack, the direct box. I know it says classic stack. I actually changed it to just the DI box. I quite like bass DI'd into a desk rather than mic'd through an amp. Though of course if you're in a studio you would do both and have 2 channels. You'd have your amp and your DI, and then you can either blend them or choose between them. So the bass is just just a very sort of basic sound. I use my Precision for that. It's got flat wound strings on it. I quite like that sort of earthy deep tone. So next up I had some, or I actually put the piano down after that. Piano I recorded in my room in the house because it's 245 kilograms and therefore not really a studio, not really a mobile instrument. So I recorded this using the Zoom IQ6 mic. You can see a demo of that on my channel. Now, I elected to record in stereo. You can do that with the Zoom IQ6. You can record a stereo audio track. Pretty neat, pretty handy. But for the other things that I did, all of the other tracks, which include all the strings, all the vocals, the acoustic guitars, I used only 1 channel, and you can specify that when you go into the audio recorder. You can say channel 1 or channel 2, which is either of the mics, or stereo, which is both. So then I had some acoustic guitars. Now I recorded 2 of these. Whenever I do acoustic guitar, I try to record 2 and then pan them. Sometimes I play exactly the same thing, but in this case the chords were the same but with very slightly different rhythmic inflections. Now what that helps to do is to fling things across the stereo image a bit. So if you listen to the 2 guitars, so the whole thing is sort of washing about a bit in the stereo mix. I also recorded a 3rd acoustic guitar, which is just single lines, just you know, working with the chords, just to give a bit of extra sort of mid-range. Those acoustic guitars, the strumming ones, are quite toppy. So the mid-range I tried to get a bit more, and that's something that people tend to forget in a mix. Is it's all about the bass and the treble to try and get those crisp, but then the mid-range kind of gets left behind sometimes. So I also address that a little bit at the mastering stage. More of that later. So if I play those tracks back together. So that was essentially my rhythm track. Down below, you can see a grey portion there. That was my guide vocal that I began with. And then I put my sort of finished vocal on the end. You can see the finished vocal here has got a few sections. Now ideally I'd like to put down a vocal. If I put down any vocals, it's got to be a straight through run really, so that you can feel the song, you can get into it. The shape of the song develops as you sing it. But you know, I made a mistake and I had to go back, and I thought, well, I was happy with the first bit, so I'll just carry on. So you know, that's fine. So if I just go back to here, you can hear the vocals.
When the end comes, too soon will you go to the place where nobody knows.
Now, you know, compared with a studio mic, obviously the Zoom IQ6 is made for a purpose. It's made for mobile recording. It's not necessarily designed for pucker full-on studio use, but I think it sounds all right. Now, at the bottom here, I've also got Isabella, who is providing some percussion. Percussion's really important and often overlooked in a song where you have, you know, a chorus can be lifted by a tambourine or a shaker or just claves and triangle. And similar to the drums, I've decided on different complexities depending on the place in the song. Now, next up, the strings and all the backing vocals. Well, the strings, I recorded 18 violin parts, so there are 6 parts and I recorded 3 of each. Why 3? Well, in a symphony orchestra, if you have the flutes playing a particular line, you'll either have 1 flute playing them or 3. You'll never hear 2 playing that line. Partly because 2 can actually make each other's little sort of variations in pitch and rhythm much more obvious than with 3, or indeed with 1. So that's the reason for recording 3 of each thing. Now if I go to my or actually the second stage was my backing vocals. Now second stage, that means that I made a backing track by merging everything from what you've just seen in the main window, the rhythm window, which is what you can see at the top here. Excuse me, is what you can see at the top here.
When the end comes.
So that is a complete mix down of that backing track, which enables me to then use the capability of the 32 channels available on GarageBand to record my vocals. So looking at the vocals themselves, if I just mute the backing track, you can hear the vocal harmonies.
Kindness knows no bounds or ties.
The only trouble with recording lots of things is, of course, the level climbs quite a lot. So you've got to be a little bit careful that you don't overload things. So also, when you press record at a particular place, like bar 24, which is where the chorus bit came in, by default, when you press record at 24, it'll go back to 23 and record. I know it says it's just counting in 1, 2, 3, 4, but it is in fact recording you before that. And that's a good job, because if you look at if I go from bar 24 and press play, the K of kindness will have gone. Kindness. So I came in, I was a bit enthusiastic with coming in with that line. And also things like the breathing in, kindness, you know, all of that is part of the human voice. So it's important to keep those things rather than suddenly cutting in. So I just grabbed all the tracks and moved them back slightly, or moved the beginning back into the part that it actually had recorded from bar 23. Now, if I just squeeze those down a bit, I did the same thing again. Rather than cut and paste, I decided to do them again, so that you can just get a slightly different inflection. Now, there we go. There's the same issue there. Now, I actually dragged the tracks back to get the K of kindness. There we go. So, how I've done the vocals, if I go into the settings here, the first backing vocal, the top one, I had the pan over to the left. Then the middle one, the second one I had in the middle, and then the third one on the right-hand side. And they're all the same note. So if I just go back and play that.
This knows no bounds or ties.
And then the next one down, I did exactly the same.
You will always touch the sky.
Now, of course, when you're singing all these parts against each other, it can be a bit hard, especially with a close harmony that I did. There are the strings have 6 parts, but the backing vocals, there are only 4 parts. So there are 12 tracks. There are the 18 violin parts. So when you're doing close harmony, you've got an option. You could either just mute what you've just done, the other part, and then just work the line out on a guitar, or I actually used Sibelius on my Mac to write all the parts out, and then I read from music, which is easier for me. I also have perfect pitch, which I know makes situations like this much, much easier. But you can learn a line and just, practice it and sing it. There's, no issue with that. So then I got other sort of sounds such as this. Now it's important to get the timing when you're doing all these multi-parts, to get that timing really, really spot on, as good as you can get it, because timing is everything, really. There are pitch variations in there. There are tuning issues with some of those parts, but when you put them all together, it makes sense. It makes, it's like building a structure out of bits of timber. 2 of the bits aren't very strong, but as soon as you start screwing and nailing other bits together, the whole thing becomes a strong sort of entity. You could kind of think of it in those terms. So I've got also a very quiet bit at the end that I recorded. You can see that I did this in sections because there are large gaps. So to save time, just go to the next section and stick your vocals down.
Kindness knows no bounds or ties.
So the S of ties at the end wasn't quite together. But this is the part of the tune which is actually free at the end. I stopped the drums at the end. If I just go back to that little bit.
Kindness knows no bounds or ties. You will always touch.
I lied, there were drums there, so there's no excuse. I should have done my parts properly. Now, after that, to get these back into the main window, you mute your backing track because you don't want that. It's already in the main window and you don't want to reproduce that. You just want to take the backing vocals. So all you do is select one of the tracks and then go merge and then tick all the other ones. I've done this already. And then merge them together. And then you can bring that back. You can actually copy that track and then go into the the first track and just paste. So go back to bar 1 and paste and you'll find your track there. If not, if that's an issue, you can export the track and then it becomes available in loops and then you can drag it in that way. There's many ways to do things here. So that's the backing vocals. Looking on to the strings. So same deal really here. I actually had my I believe I had my backing vocals on the...
Now that we are hoping that you'll always know the sky.
Yes, the backing vocals were my second stage. So my backing track now contained the backing vocals as well. So I re-merged everything in the first stage with those backing vocals in order to record the strings, so that I had an idea if the string parts and the backing vocals were going to clash or not. I kind of worked that out a little bit on Sibelius first, but can't be too careful. It's always best to have that sort of in mind. For some reason there's a drum track at the top here, Mason. I think I had that initially, and I didn't get into that sort of particular drum sound, and I used that Levi kit instead. So if I just mute the backing track. Now with the violins there, I wrote these out on the Sibelius program as well. What I've done is, somebody asked me about how I get the harmonies and what I do to get there. And the answer is, I mean, for example, the first section of that guitar solo, the first chord is D7 sharp 11. Okay, that's D F sharp A C, which is your D7 chord. E would be a ninth, and G sharp would be a sharp 11, and you could even go to the B for your 13th if you wanted. And actually, when I was doing the string parts, I would be concentrating mostly on the extensions of the chord rather than the chord itself, because that's in the bass and the keyboards, and to a certain extent the acoustic guitars as well. So the string parts, I really concentrated on the extensions. So you can, for example, if I just go to that bit, there is actually a D at the bottom of that, and then a G sharp all the way at the top, and then I've got an E and a C. So there are my 4 parts. And then for the D flat 7, which is the next one, I think I put, if you see a 7 chord written, D flat 7, to a certain extent, and it depends on taste and whether it works with the top line, you can add the 9th and the 13th. The 11th is a little bit more tricky, but the 9th and the 13th are fair game. That's the 2nd and the 6th if you're working with your scale. So, but the reason they're called 9 and 13 is because the 7th has to be there. So there's a little bit on the harmony there. I've done some videos about harmony and about extensions, chord extensions. Check those out on my channel. So at the end, with the violins, I had to play a chord that was as long as possible. So I basically just kept it going for as long as I could, and then used the fade function, or rather the automation. I don't use the automatic fade very much because it never really does what I want it to do. I've got my own sort of ideas about that. Now that was free at the end. You can hear the noise of me sort of taking the violin out from under my chin. But what I did was I didn't worry too much about that. I just mixed the strings down, which was my next job, and then brought it back into the main window and then just put a fade on the end so you couldn't hear those noises afterwards. So there are some pizzicato tracks as well. I recorded some just in that little sort of quiet section between the verses. Oh, let's go back and find those. There they are. For some reason I recorded a 4th. That doesn't matter too much, but odd numbers are better than even when you're doing multi-takes of the same note. A little sound in the background. I recorded these in my dining room where the piano is, because it's quite a nice reverb in there, but I did add a sort of artificial reverb afterwards, because I just felt it needed a little bit of a wash over the entire mix. So looking at that, I merged all that together as well, and then my final stage is this, where you can see essentially my tracks, and I also added an electric piano part at the end, and that sort of Korg nano synth thing Korg Monotron delay. I love this thing. It's just like this sort of all sorts of effects you can get with that. That's at 25 quid. It's nice, useful bit of kit, especially if you're looking for an ambient sound. You're going through your computer and looking for the sounds and think, oh, I can't find anything. It's that. So just briefly then, looking at the beginning, I've got my Korg. I've put that through a reverb on GarageBand. I also got the guitar solo. Now what I did with this was to plug my guitar in. Somebody else asked about the gear used. The iRig, I used that for my bass guitar and my electric guitar and the Korg Monotron. And it's just got a lead that you plug into your iPad and then a headphone output. And then the other bit of kit I had was the Zoom IQ6 mic. Apart from that, nothing else, apart from my musical instruments. I did, however, have a USB keyboard plugged in to play the Rhodes part, and you have this, which is the USB to Lightning connector. Some people call it the camera kit because you can use the iPad to take photos from your digital camera and store them on, on your iOS device. But it serves also to run a keyboard. Now I happen to know that keyboard, the particular one here, the Novation Launch Key 49, will work with this iPad, will work with a 5th generation iPad. Sometimes if you plug a keyboard that's too big in, it will say can't supply enough power or accessory not supported or something like that. The solution is to plug the keyboard into its power supply first before connecting the kit up. And then the iPad will see that the keyboard has voltage of its own and it'll go, yeah, okay. So there are various ways of getting around that problem. So the Rhodes part, oh, sorry, I digress. The guitar part, sorry. The electric guitar I recorded with my Telecaster through the iRig onto and just use the amp simulator on GarageBand. So I'll just go forward to the guitar solo.
You'll always touch the sky.
So it's really compressed. If I go into the guitar amp bit where you can see I put a compressor on there and then like this thing called the Vibe, which is like a vibrato chorus scanner from a Hammond organ, so a slow rate, just to give it a bit of sort of chorusy width, and then put it into my sort of stadium stack. It's great. You just tweak and find the sound that you like, and of course that screamy sort of distorted sound you can have through your headphones, and you won't end up having the Environmental Health Organization come and tell you to stop. So there's the guitar there. That first chord, that D9 sharp 11, that was a bit of a pig to solo over. Essentially what that sharp 11 gives you is an E major triad. So that's what I tried to solo over, and actually that worked fine. Sometimes you have to sort of think of things a little bit differently to get a solo over something that's sort of a bit more harmonically complicated. So electric piano. Just the internal Fender Rhodes sound with a bit of echo and reverb. Fantastic noises. I had a real Rhodes back in the sort of early 2000s, late 90s actually. And it was great. It's lovely. I sold it to a mate of mine. He's still got it, but it just weighed a ton. And when you play something like this through a pair of speakers, you do go, it's quite close actually. I know that there are the purists, and a real one still has a depth to it when you're sat playing it. I think it's more for the player than the listener, where the differences actually come about. So there are my things. Now, there's a tiny little bit here in the lead vocal. I got a note that the second chorus, the word sky, was a little bit sharp. Now, I forgot to cut the top one out, because what I did was I edited this and pasted it onto another channel and then used one of the audio unit plugins to just tweak the pitch of that vocal. Now, when you open the audio unit plugins after saving a song, it looks like it hasn't stored the settings, but it has. All it's done is reset the controls back to 0. Not really sure why that is. Maybe that will be a solution to iOS 13, perhaps. So this is iOS 12 that I'm running here, and as you can hear, every time I've pressed play on the iPad, it's just gone, okay, yeah, okay then. No crashing, no blips, no nothing, and it has allowed me to try and create my tune with the minimum of fuss. I almost forgot. What did I do after this? Well, I loaded this, I merged it, I exported it onto... In fact, what I did was I went to the main window, so saving the song, and then I held this, went to share, and then song, share, and then found the direct link to Final Touch. Now, I'm not going to do that because I've already done that in Final Touch. So if I go to Final Touch, you can see that I now get my stereo file in ready for mastering. Now, what is mastering? Well, it's a way in which you can make the level of your tune a bit louder, so that it can compete with other things. But more importantly, you can do things like multiband compression, where you can actually change the sound ever so slightly to reveal maybe deficiencies in your mix. Now, take that with a pinch of salt. Don't think you can fix problems at the mastering stage, but you might, when you master it and you sort of compress the mid-range, you think, oh, I can hear those acoustic guitars a bit better now. It's a different thing than mixing the acoustic guitars higher. So I'll just go through the stages that I went through. First of all, I went to my dynamics, which is the main thing that we have here. You can add a bit of pre-EQ, post-EQ if there's really deficiencies, but these are really corrective tools only. Dynamics, you've got 3 bands. You've got the low, middle and high bands, and you can actually change the borderlines in terms of frequency between those bands. So what I did was, as you can see, my mid frequencies, where I really wanted to make maximum use of the dynamic range, of the range available on my speakers, was to compress this ever so slightly. You can see a ratio of 2.4 to 1, and then I've actually raised the gain a little bit further just to bring out that mid a bit. So if I just go to the beginning, now you have a little telltale red section that goes under that flicks underneath that line, and that shows that it is in fact compressing, which means if it's compressing and then you raise the gain, you're raising stuff that was a little bit lower down. So I've done a similar thing with the bass and the treble, and actually what I've also done with the bass is to make sure, yes, I've actually cut a tiny bit of the very lowest bass, because there's a lot of energy there, and most of the time you won't hear it, but it'll make a difference to your compression, and it'll make a difference to the maximizer, which is the last stage here. So there's reverb and stereo imaging. I'd leave those alone, really. I'm happy with the stereo imaging, but you can make things mono by doing this. If you go to here, you can have mono or stereo. You can even set your bass. The mono filter, what this does is it directs automatically any frequencies that in the low end into the middle, which is what you would ideally want if you're mastering for vinyl. If you have bass on one side and nothing on the other side, the needle is out of balance, and if it's bad enough, it's a big enough cut, you can throw the stylus off the record. So my final stage then was the mastering stage, where I have a bit of a sort of a limiting threshold here. Now, a limiter is an infinite ratio compressor, and that's so you can see when I'm playing the chorus here.
No bounds or ties, you will always touch the sky.
There's a little meter called attenuation here, which basically shows you where it's squashing stuff. I never like to go beyond sort of 4, 5, 6 dB at the most, because it really can suck the life out of your tune. So there we go. There it is. There's a version of my tune, and I've only used my iPad.